I worked at a summer camp in North Georgia for a few years back in the early 2000s. We took kids on overnight hikes and did long sections of the Appalachian Trail near Dahlonega. That area, if you don't know, is right near the beginning of the trail, and it also happens to be a place where the Army Rangers train. You'd sometimes see signs posted on trees warning about military exercises or low-flying helicopters, but it was never a big deal. The camp had a system, and we followed it. Still, there was always this quiet understanding among the counselors that you stayed alert when hiking out there. It wasn't superstition, it was just common sense. This particular story happened about 15 years ago. I was in my early 20s, and it was my second summer at the camp. We were leading a small group of kids, middle schoolers, on a 3-night backpacking trip. It was hot early July, real muggy days and cooler nights. That week we were out near Blood Mountain, though a few miles off the usual trail traffic. The counselors had picked a lesser-known site not far from a fire road. It was flat, quiet, and had a stream nearby. We liked it because it was easier to spread out, and the kids could feel like they were really in the wild. There were 3 counselors on that trip. Me, a guy named Evan, and a girl named Kayla. She was a junior in college at the time, tall, blonde, outdoorsy. She was good with the kids and didn't scare easy. We took turns doing gear checks, boiling water, running the meals. The kids were in their tents by 9 p.m., and by 10, the 3 of us had rolled out our sleeping bags on a tarp maybe 20 yards from them. We cowboy camped, just laying on top of the tarp under the stars. It's something we did often. Less of a hassle than tents, and the air was cooler on your face. We never had issues before. That night was clear and quiet. You could hear some frogs and insects, but it wasn't too loud. I remember I fell asleep fast, like I always did out there. I was tired from hiking and loading packs all day. We all were. I woke up just after sunrise. The light through the trees was soft and gold, the kind that makes you blink a few times and feel disoriented. I sat up and stretched. Evan was already up, sitting on a rock tying his boots. The kids were still quiet in their tents. Then I heard Kayla say, real calm but weird, "Hey, what the hell is this?" She was lying on her side, facing away from us, still half in her sleeping bag. I walked over to where she was and saw it immediately. Right next to her head, maybe 6 inches from her face, a long black combat knife was stabbed into the dirt. The kind with a serrated edge.
Clean, shiny.
Tied around the handle with a strip of paracord was a folded piece of paper. She didn't touch it. Neither did I. Evan walked over and crouched down, looked at it, then gently pulled the paper off. He opened it and read it. His face didn't change, but I could see the color drain out of his neck. He passed it to me. It said, in simple handwriting, no smudges or tears. "We could have killed you last night. Zoxo, the Army Rangers." That's it. I still remember how quiet the forest felt right then. Not peaceful, but heavy, like all the air got sucked out of the woods. Kayla was just staring at the knife. Evan stood up and started looking around slowly, scanning the trees. I did the same, but there was nothing to see, just trunks and light, like any other morning. We didn't say much. We all knew that someone had come into our camp, got close enough to lean over and stab a knife into the dirt right next to Kayla's face, and none of us had stirred. They didn't take anything. They didn't mess with the kids. Just that knife and that note. Kayla finally stood up. Her face was pale, her hands shaking a little. She kept rubbing her neck like someone had touched her. We started packing up right away, quietly but quickly. The kids were still asleep, which helped. We didn't want to scare them. We didn't even discuss staying another night. It wasn't a question. We got them up, had them eat some bars for breakfast, and said we were heading back a day early due to incoming weather. It was a lie, but believable. They were disappointed, but we kept things moving. As we hiked out, we kept glancing over our shoulders. Every now and then I swore I heard something move just out of sight, but it could have been squirrels or our own paranoia. Still, I never felt easy. The whole hike out, I felt watched. We made it back to the van by mid-afternoon. Kayla sat up front with me and didn't say a word the whole ride back. Evan sat with the kids and kept them laughing and singing camp songs, which honestly helped keep things normal. When we got back to the main camp, we pulled the camp director aside. We didn't make a scene. We just told him exactly what happened. At first, he looked like he didn't believe us. Then we showed him the note. He read it twice and set it down real slow. He said he was going to report it to the Forest Service and contact some military liaison office. Said it might have been some off-duty guys messing around, but it wasn't acceptable. He told us not to talk about it to the other counselors or kids, not because he was trying to hide it, but because he didn't want rumors spreading or people panicking. Nothing ever came of the report as far as I know. We never got a follow-up. No one ever owned up to it. But the director quietly pulled all our future overnight trips away from that part of the trail. We started going more southward after that, closer to Amicalola Falls, and some of the better patrolled spots. That was the last year Kayla worked there. She finished the season, but didn't come back. I didn't blame her. For me, I kept going back a couple more summers, but I never cowboy camped again. Not once. I always pitched a tent and zipped it shut, even in perfect weather.
Sometimes I think about that night.
Not in a spooky way, but in a cold, practical way. Someone trained, someone who knew how to move without being heard, came into our camp. They could have done anything they wanted. They didn't, but they wanted us to know they could have. That note wasn't a joke. It wasn't some kid playing soldier. It was a message, a very direct one. We were in their training ground, and they let us know. It was the middle of July when we made the climb. Me and two buddies, just chasing that strange mix of silence and adrenaline you only find in places people don't usually go. The trail up had been brutal, barely even a trail after a while. There were no markers, no other hikers, nothing but endless gray rock and small patches of stubborn mountain grass. We were high up, higher than I'd ever camped before. Our legs burned all day, and the air got thinner with every step, but we had one thing pushing us: that glacier. That giant wall of blue ice sitting at the top of the ridge, like a frozen ocean frozen in mid-crash. When we reached it, it didn't even feel real. The thing was massive, stretching like a frozen cliff along the backside of the mountain bowl we'd come up through. The air was quiet, dead quiet, like the mountain was holding its breath. We set up camp a few hundred feet from it, just far enough away that we could still feel the cold air bleeding off it, but not close enough to get hit with any sudden wind bursts. It was strange how much colder it felt just being near it, like standing in front of a freezer with the door wide open. We'd brought a basic 3-person tent, compact and easy to carry, and we used the surrounding rocks to build a small half wall around it to block some of the air. It wasn't much, maybe 2 feet high, but it made a difference. We cooked near the edge of our little wall, the stove flame flickering in the wind even with a windscreen around it. It was quiet, almost too quiet. I remember how the only real sound came from the occasional creaking or cracking from the glacier itself. The sound would echo strangely through the bowl, low and deep, like the mountain shifting in its sleep. That evening, we sat on our foam pads and watched a pair of mountaineers start their climb up the glacier. Tiny figures against a towering blue wall, tied together with a rope and moving in small, careful steps. It looked slow, cold, and dangerous, but beautiful. The kind of thing you know you'll never do, but feel lucky just to witness. As the sun set, the glacier glowed faintly blue. It was the kind of view that burned into your memory, the kind you think about when you're stuck behind a desk or lying in bed unable to sleep. We slept hard that night, wrapped tight in our bags, the cold creeping in despite all our layers. The wind stayed low, and aside from a few distant pops from the ice, it was a still night. Morning came with bright sun, clear skies, and the sound of runoff, meltwater trickling down into little temporary streams all around us. You could hear it beneath the rocks, beneath the ice. It sounded alive. After a quick breakfast of granola bars and whatever was left of our instant coffee, we packed a small day bag and headed off to check out a waterfall we'd seen from the ridge on our way up. It wasn't marked on any map we had, just a silver line in the distance that we figured was worth checking out. The walk wasn't far, maybe an hour or so over uneven rock and across some light snow patches that hadn't melted yet. The air was crisp and dry, and the sun made it feel warmer than it really was. The waterfall was better than we'd hoped, pouring out of the side of the cliff and splashing down into a series of bright, cold pools. It looked untouched, clean, untouched by humans. We sat there for a while, shoes off, soaking our feet and letting the cold water numb the aches. We took a few photos, just the kind you take without thinking too much about, assuming they'll never do the place justice anyway. We stayed out there for a few hours, lost in that strange high-altitude calm. No reception, no noises beyond what nature decided to give us, and nothing in the world to worry about. When we headed back, the sun had shifted westward and shadows had started stretching across the rocks. It felt a little cooler, but nothing alarming. We talked about heating up some soup, maybe staying another night before heading back down. We hadn't seen a single soul besides the 2 climbers since we got up there. But when we crested the last rise back into our camp bowl, something was wrong. Off. The rocks looked out of place, scattered. Our tent wasn't there. At first, it didn't register. We just stood there, staring down, trying to make sense of it. Then it hit. Our tent was gone. Not collapsed. Not dragged by the wind.
Gone.
In its place was a mess of rocks, torn fabric, and what looked like a mini landslide. Huge chunks of ice sat where our tent had been, surrounded by smaller bits of broken glacier and sharp, angular stones. One of our foam pads was shredded and half buried under gravel. Our stove, that heavy steel stove, was bent and partially buried. One of our backpacks was wedged in between 2 boulders like a toy. We didn't speak. We just stood there and stared. It didn't take long to figure out what happened. A piece of the glacier, a massive one, probably the size of a small car or bigger, had broken off and tumbled down. It must have hit loose rock and triggered a mini slide, dragging everything in its path. Our tent was right in the way. Everything we had was there, or what was left of it. Our sleeping bags were torn open, covered in dirt and ice. Our food bag had been flattened completely. One of the tent poles had pierced straight into the ground like a spear. We walked around, slowly, checking the damage. I remember my hands were shaking. Not from the cold, not entirely. Just the realization that if we hadn't gone to see that waterfall, if we'd stayed to rest or nap, or even been running a bit behind, we would have been right there when it hit. No question. It wasn't just rocks. That ice had weight and speed and force. It wouldn't have been a question of injuries. It would have been instant. We'd be buried under 30 tons of ice and stone, and no one would have known for days. Maybe weeks. No one knew we were up here.
We didn't have time to panic.
We had to act. We dug out what we could, salvaged 1 pack with the emergency radio and enough supplies to hike back down. The other gear was either crushed or buried. We didn't even try to sleep there again. We made a decision in less than 5 minutes. Grab what you can and move.
Get down. Now.
The descent was brutal. We had to move fast but careful, with tired legs and heavy minds. Every sound from the glacier behind us made us flinch. Every gust of wind felt like another warning. We camped far lower that night, in a sheltered forest clearing, barely able to eat or talk. I remember lying awake, not from fear anymore, but from realization. That thin, sharp line between being alive and not. We had crossed it without even knowing. We made it out the next day, limping and dirty, but whole. When we reached the base trailhead, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. I still think about that day, about how close it was. People talk about near-death experiences like dramatic movie scenes, but this wasn't like that. It was quiet, cold, slow. It didn't even look dangerous until after it had already passed. Nature doesn't warn you. It just happens. We never went back to that glacier. I don't think we ever will. It was sometime in the fall of 2011, I think. The leaves hadn't fully changed, but the edge of summer was definitely gone. Me and my buddy, I'll just call him Jake, had decided to take a few days off work and get out to Beaver Lake near Bolivar, Missouri. We both needed the break. The plan was simple: drive out, hike around until we found a decent clearing near the water, fish a little. maybe cook up something fresh if we were lucky, and just sleep under the trees for a couple of nights. Nothing fancy. Just us, our gear, and some time away from everything. We pulled in that morning after an early breakfast and started hiking with our packs. The lake wasn't busy, probably too late in the season for most folks. It was cool but not cold, probably mid-60s. We were in no rush, just picking our way through trails, stepping over tree roots and taking in the quiet. We looked for a good flat spot with some tree cover, not too close to the waterline but close enough to have easy access. After a couple hours of walking, we found it. A wide patch of flat, soft ground with enough space to pitch a tent and build a fire ring. It was about 20 or 30 feet from the lake's edge, slightly elevated, with a nice view of the water through the trees. We both dropped our packs and stood there for a while, just listening and breathing in that clean air. We set up camp pretty quickly. Tent, sleeping bags, food storage tied up, a rough fire pit circled with rocks. Nothing fancy. Once everything was in place, we lay back on our sleeping pads in the shade and dozed for a while. The walk had worn us out more than we expected, and there was still plenty of daylight left. We planned to fish in the afternoon, maybe cook by sunset, and stay up a while by the fire. Nothing out of the ordinary. After the nap, we grabbed our rods and started working our way along the edge of the lake. That's when things started feeling off. The lake didn't stink exactly, but there was a stale, heavy smell to the air. Not quite rotten, but close. At first, we thought it was just the normal lake smell, muck, algae, maybe something dead nearby. But then we started noticing things in the shallows. Fish skeletons, dozens of them, scattered along the shoreline. Not just a few here and there. There were clusters of them, half buried in the mud or caught in reeds. Small fish, big fish, even a couple turtles that looked bloated and pale, the kind that looked like they hadn't died yesterday. Some were just shells. Some still had dried bits of skin hanging off the bones. I remember crouching down to look at one of the turtles. Its shell was cracked. Not like from an animal or from decay, just split clean down the middle like it had been dropped or burst. Jake didn't say much, just kind of stood behind me staring at the water. The lake was still. No ripples except from our footsteps. No birds. No frogs. It was strange how quiet it was, even then, but we were more focused on trying to figure out what the hell had happened to all the fish. We walked the bank for another 30 minutes, rods in hand, trying to spot better fishing spots, but the further we went, the more we saw dead stuff. Even what looked like a raccoon a little up the bank, curled in on itself, fur thinned out and skin stretched tight. Nothing about that lake felt right. We fished for a while anyway, maybe a few hours. Not a single bite, not even a tug. The water looked clean enough, clear, no scum or algae blooms. But there was nothing in it. No movement, no insects dancing on the surface, no minnows in the shallows. It was like the lake was dead. We stuck it out until dusk, just hoping we were wrong, but eventually we gave up and made our way back to camp. We lit a small fire, boiled some water, made a quick meal from the freeze-dried food we'd brought, and sat around staring into the flames. That's when the silence really started pressing in. Normally, you go camping in Missouri and you'll hear stuff all night: owls, coyotes, frogs, crickets, raccoons digging around. That night, there was almost nothing. Just the occasional buzz from an insect and the crackle of our fire. No birds, no rustling, no wind. The air felt thick and the forest felt like it was holding its breath. We tried not to talk about it too much. I think neither of us wanted to admit how uncomfortable we were. We kept glancing at the tree-line, expecting to see movement, but there was nothing. No glowing eyes, no rustle of leaves. Just stillness. A dead kind of stillness. When it came time to turn in, we didn't sleep well. The silence was too much. Every time I started to drift off, I'd suddenly become hyper-aware of how quiet it was. The kind of quiet that gets into your head and makes your ears ring. Even when I rolled over or shifted in my sleeping bag, I felt like I was being too loud, like something out there was listening. I kept waking up every hour or so. At one point, I opened the tent flap just to peek out. The fire had burned down to embers, and the lake looked like black glass through the trees. No mist, no breeze, just stillness. I sat there for a while listening. Not because I heard something, but because I didn't. No owls, no bugs, no splashes. Just the low hum in my ears from the sheer lack of sound. By morning, we were both awake before the sun had fully come up. Neither of us had really slept. We stepped out of the tent, stretched, and walked toward the water. The sky was pale gray, and the air had that damp, early morning chill to it. But the quiet was still there. Not even a single bird call. No squirrels in the trees. Just the crunch of our boots on dry leaves. That was when it really hit me. Something was wrong with that place. You can't have a healthy forest next to a lake and hear nothing. We talked about it a little while eating a dry breakfast bar. The dead fish, the dry night, the silence. We hadn't brought much water with us, just enough for the first day and some for cooking. We'd planned on purifying lake water for the rest of the trip. But looking at that lake now, we knew there was no way in hell we were drinking from it. Whatever had happened to the wildlife, it had to be from the water. Maybe some kind of chemical runoff. Maybe illegal dumping upstream. It didn't matter.
We couldn't stay.
The air didn't feel right, and the lake was a dead zone. Even if it was just some weird fluke, we weren't going to risk getting sick or stranded out there with no water. We packed up as quickly as we could. No real talk, just moving. Tent down, trash bagged, fire pit scattered. By the time the sun was properly up, we had our packs on and were heading back down the trail. We didn't take breaks, just kept walking, not because we were afraid of anything jumping out of the woods, but because we both had that low, anxious feeling in our guts. Like we weren't supposed to be there. Like we'd wandered into some part of the woods that was trying to keep itself secret. It took us a couple hours to get back to the car. When we finally saw it through the trees, we both let out a breath at the same time. That was the first noise either of us had made in a while. We didn't say much on the drive back, just kept glancing out the window, watching the trees pass by. I've camped a lot in my life. Still do. But I've never gone back to Beaver Lake. And I don't think I ever will. I don't care if it was just bad timing or if someone cleaned it up since then. That place felt wrong. Something had poisoned it, and it wasn't just the lake. It was like the whole area had gone quiet, like nature had given up on it. That was the only camping trip I ever ended early. And honestly, I don't regret it. Some places just feel like they're telling you to leave. And when they do, you listen. It was the second night of our camping trip, and I was 13 at the time. We were staying in a bush area, nothing fancy, just me, a couple of family members, and a friend or two. We had set up close to a creek, surrounded by thick trees and dry scrub. The adults were in their tents, but I decided to sleep outside on a tarp. It made me feel tougher, like I was doing something more real. No tent walls, just me and the stars. The air was crisp and still, the kind of night where everything sounds louder than it should. Crickets chirped somewhere in the distance, and every once in a while a gum tree would creak as it shifted with the breeze. I was curled up in my sleeping bag, with my backpack stuffed under my head as a pillow. It wasn't comfortable, not really, but it felt better than nothing. I had my hoodie pulled tight, only my nose sticking out, just listening to the quiet hum of the bush and trying to fall asleep. I was just starting to drift off when I heard something, a noise to the left. It wasn't loud, just a soft rustling, but it was sharp enough to snap me fully awake. My eyes flew open. I stayed completely still, heart already picking up speed. It was the kind of noise that didn't match the wind or normal animal sounds. It sounded like something moving through the dry leaves, like something deliberate. Another rustle, then the sound of branches shifting. Something or someone was walking through the bush nearby. I sat up too fast, and my sleeping bag twisted around me. I fought it off and looked toward the sound, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. There was no moon, just a faint glow from the stars above, and the trees blocked most of that anyway. Everything out past the immediate area was just shifting shadows. The noise kept coming. Leaves crunching, bushes rustling. It wasn't heavy, but it wasn't small either. Bigger than a possum, maybe even as big as a dog. I strained my ears, holding my breath, hoping it would just stop, but it didn't. I looked around for something, anything, to defend myself with. There was nothing. No stick, no rock, no flashlight. My stomach turned, and I had this sudden panicky thought that maybe this was how people got killed in the middle of nowhere, sleeping on the ground like idiots while something stalked them from the trees. I ducked back into my sleeping bag and pulled it over my head, breathing as quietly as I could. I felt like a coward, but there was no part of me that wanted to get up and go see what it was. Every horror story I'd ever heard, every dumb movie where someone says I'll check it out and never comes back, it all flashed through my head. No way.
I was not doing that.
The rustling got closer. It circled a little to the side, then stopped completely. Just silence. For a few seconds I thought maybe it had gone, but then something tugged at my head. My pillow shifted. My bag. I thought maybe I'd moved it by accident, but then it tugged again. Slowly, carefully. Not like someone yanking it. More like something dragging it, inch by inch. I stayed frozen. I didn't even breathe. Then the bag was gone. I heard it slide over the tarp and hit the ground beside me. Something was dragging it into the bushes. The same rustling started up again, now heading away from me. That's when my brain fully broke. My whole body tensed up, and all I could think was that someone had come into our camp and was stealing things, or worse, setting me up for something awful. I started imagining a man with a knife hiding in the dark, or some animal ready to jump me. I was too afraid to scream, too afraid to move. I just lay there in my bag, heart slamming, breath shaking. Then I had this insane idea. I thought, what if I scared them first? I remembered some random advice I'd read online once about scaring away wild animals or people. Make noise, pretend to be something bigger, meaner. In my head, barking like a dog seemed like a good idea at the time. I figured if it was a person, they'd think I had a dog. If it was an animal, maybe it would get confused and run off. So I did it. Still wrapped in my sleeping bag like an idiot burrito, I sat up halfway and just started barking. Loud, panicked, not even trying to sound like a real dog, just barking. Like a lunatic. And then I stood up, still barking, hoping to look big and scary even though I probably looked like some sleep-deprived weirdo flailing around. The rustling stopped. I stood there frozen, squinting into the trees, my sleeping bag around my knees and bare feet on the tarp. And then I saw it. A small, round shape waddled out from the edge of the bushes. It was low to the ground, chunky, with thick legs and tiny eyes that caught the starlight for a second. It looked up at me. Not afraid, not impressed, just staring. It had my bag in its mouth. A wombat. A goddamn wombat. It just stood there for a second, then dropped the bag, sniffed it, and turned around like nothing had happened. No panic, no fear, just casually waddling back into the bush like it had done nothing wrong. The rustling faded with it as it disappeared into the undergrowth. I just stood there in the cold, still half tangled in my bag, watching the spot where it had vanished. My heart was still hammering. I felt dizzy and stupid. The whole time I'd been shaking with fear, thinking it was a killer or some wild animal trying to get at me. It had just been a wombat. I walked over and grabbed my bag. It was a bit wet and covered in dirt, but everything inside seemed fine. I wiped it off the best I could and crawled back into my sleeping bag. I didn't sleep well after that. Every sound after that made me twitch. Every time a twig snapped or the wind shifted the leaves, I'd freeze and wait for another visit. But nothing else came. No more rustling, no more stolen bags. Just me, lying there in the dark, feeling dumb but still kind of wired from how scared I'd been. Looking back now, it's hilarious. A wombat. But that night, at 13 years old, it was terrifying. It felt real. The fear wasn't just in my head. It was in my whole body. It didn't matter that it turned out to be nothing. In the moment, it was everything. That fear, that panic, it stayed with me. Even now, whenever someone suggests sleeping outside without a tent, I think about that night. I remember the feeling of that bag slipping away and the silence that followed. And then I remember barking like a dog at a wombat. Yeah, never again. We were out in the West Country, camping in this massive field that backed up right into a thick patch of woods. The kind of place that feels completely dead, quiet the moment the sun drops below the hills. It was early spring, not too cold, but still chilly enough that once the sun dipped, you felt it in your bones. We were 5 lads and 1 girl, all of us around 20 or so, just there to drink, light a fire, and mess around for a weekend away from the noise of regular life. The campfire was our center, big as hell. We'd stacked up this makeshift fire pit with rocks from the field and wood we'd gathered from the edges of the forest. By the time it was dark, we had a proper blaze going. There were 6 of us, but only 5 went into the woods. One of the guys, Marcus, had brought his girlfriend, so we figured we'd let them have a moment to themselves by the fire while the rest of us did a bit of night exploring. We'd had a few beers already, and that jittery, half-sober, half-hyped kind of energy had built up in us. We weren't really planning on going deep into the woods, just poke around, freak each other out a bit, have a laugh. Just lads being idiots in the dark. Jake, the one in front, had this huge mag light. Not just your standard flashlight either. This was the kind you could beat someone to death with. Like the ones American cops use. Bright as hell too. It cut clean through the darkness in a narrow beam. Then there was Neil with his stupid little camcorder that had night vision. He brought it along just to mess around with it. He didn't want to walk in the back, though, said it freaked him out. He wanted to be between someone. So I volunteered to take the rear, told him I'd hang back. So it was Jake in front with the light, then Neil filming, then Simon, then Jamie, and then me in the very back. The line moved slow because the forest path was narrow and overgrown in places. We couldn't walk side by side, and all we had was Jake's light pointing forward. Once you were out of that beam, it was pure black. I mean total, oppressive black. Like swimming in ink. The kind of black that makes you feel blind. As we went deeper, the trees got tighter. The branches stretched low over the path, and every few steps someone would curse after getting snagged by a twig or tripping over roots. It smelled like wet bark and moss, and the only sounds were the crunch of boots, the occasional laugh, and Neil whispering stupid commentary into his camera. Nothing out of the ordinary. We were just trying to freak each other out. Imagine some maniac living out here, one of the guys said at some point. Just stupid stuff. But even that kind of talk hits different when you're in the middle of pitch black woods, miles from the nearest town. We were maybe 10-15 minutes in when it happened. It was sudden, the kind of noise that shocks your system. It came from off to the right, maybe 20-30 feet out. Not right next to us, but close enough. It was a massive crack, like a dry log being split in 2 by a wood axe, but louder, thicker, heavier. Not a pop, not a twig. This was a big-ass log, like something big had stomped on it or smashed it. It stopped all of us dead. Jake froze. The beam of his torch stopped mid-step, frozen in the center of the path. Neil stopped filming. I couldn't see any of their faces, but you could feel the tension ripple back down the line to me. No one said anything, and for a second, we just stood there listening. The forest was dead silent. No wind, no birds, no rustling. That quiet, unnatural silence that presses down on your ears. Slowly, Jake started to swing the torch beam off the path to the right, where the sound had come from. At first, it just lit up trees, then more trees, and then something else. I don't know what the hell it was. It wasn't a tree. It wasn't an animal I recognized. It was a mass, a dark, bulky shape. It was tall, taller than a man, maybe wider. It stood there, not moving, kind of hunched. Not crouched like a person or an animal, but hunched like it didn't fit properly between the trees. The light barely reached it. We didn't get details. No face, no features. Just a big, bulky thing standing still in the trees. I didn't wait for any explanation. I just turned and ran. Full sprint, no hesitation. My legs were moving before I even registered what I was doing. My heart was pounding in my throat, and I couldn't even scream. I just laughed.
I don't know why.
A weird, high-pitched laugh, like I'd completely lost control of myself. Like my brain had no idea how else to process what we'd seen. Behind me, I heard Neil shout, "God damn it," and then his footsteps pounding the dirt after me. Then Jake and the others, crashing through the underbrush, yelling, running. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if it was following. The way out of the woods was a blur. I just followed the path by memory, only stopping once I saw the firelight flickering through the trees. We burst into the clearing like lunatics, out of breath, stumbling, panicked. Marcus and his girlfriend just looked up at us like we were idiots. They hadn't heard anything. We told them everything in a rush, about the noise, the shape, what we'd seen. They didn't believe us.
Not really.
They thought we were just messing about, hyped up, maybe a bit too into our own story. But we weren't lying. I know what I saw. We all saw it. Still, the fire was bright, and the sky was clear. We were in a wide open field, away from the trees. We figured, as long as we stayed out in the open, we'd be fine. That thing, whatever it was, hadn't followed us. At least, we didn't think so. We didn't see it again. Didn't hear anything after that. I ended up taking some ecstasy about an hour later. Not the smartest move, I guess, but I needed something to level me out. My brain was still buzzing from the fear. Everything felt a bit surreal after that. The fire looked like it was breathing. The stars stretched and blinked in patterns. I laid back in the grass, staring at the sky, trying to forget the thing in the woods. I didn't sleep much that night, but I didn't feel scared anymore, either. We stayed up until sunrise. No more noises. No more shapes. In the daylight, the woods looked harmless again. We even walked the path the next morning, just to prove to ourselves we hadn't imagined it. We didn't find anything. No tracks. No broken log. Nothing. It looked like nothing had ever happened. But I know what I saw. We all do. We don't talk about it much now. I guess there's nothing to say. No one else would believe it. And I've never been able to explain it. We don't have bears in England. No moose. No wild animals that big. Whatever it was real. It made a sound that vibrated through the trees, and a shape I still see when I close my eyes in the dark. I haven't been back to that field since. I was around 14 when this happened. I was on a summer camping trip with my dad in the mountains of Wyoming. We used to go every year, just the two of us. It was our thing. We'd drive up for hours, hike into the woods, set up camp by some lake or stream, and stay out there for a week or so. This particular trip, though, something happened that I've never forgotten, not to me exactly, but to the man camping right next to us. The guy's name was Dave, I think. He was probably in his early 40s, camping alone except for his dog. The dog was this massive, beautiful husky, white and gray fur, those sharp blue eyes, and always full of energy. I remember spending hours throwing sticks for him, running around the trees with him while my dad cooked or read a book in his camp chair. That dog was the friendliest animal I'd ever met. We didn't talk much with Dave. He was nice, polite, but seemed like he wanted quiet. Still, we ended up camping close to each other, maybe 30 or 40 feet apart, tents set up by a bend in the creek that came out of the woods and pooled into a calm little basin. It was the third night of the trip when it happened. We'd all had dinner, said goodnight, and gone into our tents by about 9 or so. My dad was snoring within 15 minutes. I stayed awake longer, reading by flashlight, until eventually I drifted off. The night was calm. I remembered that clearly. No wind, no sounds except the crickets and the water moving gently a few yards away. The next morning, I got up early, just as the sky was turning that faint gray-blue color before sunrise. The air was cold, really cold. I unzipped the tent, stepped out, and stretched. I remember hearing Dave moving around already. I saw him near his little fire pit, poking at the coals and pouring water over them. His dog was lying by the tent, alert but relaxed. I walked over to say hi and pet the dog, but I could tell something was off. Dave looked tired, like he hadn't slept at all. There were bags under his eyes, and he was quiet, more than usual. He didn't tell me the full story right away, just mentioned he'd had a rough night. Later, while my dad and I were having breakfast, he walked over and told us what happened. I'll never forget the way he told it. Not in some dramatic way, not with any excitement. He just said it flat, almost like he was still trying to make sense of it himself. He said that sometime during the night, maybe around 1 or 2 in the morning, he'd been fast asleep when he felt a breeze across his face. At first, He thought it was nothing, just the flap of the tent shifting or maybe the wind kicking up. But then he heard a soft, crunching noise. Not loud, just the sound of something stepping on dry pine needles. He sat up slowly, still half asleep, and looked around the tent. That's when he saw the hole. There was a long tear in the side of his tent, right along one of the seams near the bottom, maybe 1.5 feet long. Not huge, but big enough. He blinked, trying to figure out what he was looking at. And then, out of the darkness, a head pushed through the rip. At first, he thought it was his dog. That made sense. Maybe the dog had gotten out of the tent and was trying to come back in. The head looked similar, pointed ears, white and gray fur. But as it came through more, Dave realized something was off. The face was too narrow. The snout was longer. The eyes weren't blue, they were yellow. And then it hit him. This wasn't his dog. It was a wolf. He told us his heart nearly stopped. He'd seen wolves in the wild before, from a distance, but never this close. This one was inches from him. It didn't snarl. It didn't growl. It just looked around the tent, its nose twitching. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it backed out and vanished into the darkness. Dave waited, frozen. He didn't move. He said he was sure the wolf had come to hunt, either him or his dog. He figured the worst was about to happen. After what felt like minutes, though it was probably only 30 seconds, he finally crawled to the tear in the tent and peeked out. He was expecting to see blood, maybe his dog fighting off a pack of wolves. But what he saw stopped him cold. Out there in the dim light of the moon, his husky was running in circles, playing, and chasing after him, darting through the trees, was the wolf. They weren't fighting. They weren't growling. They were playing. The two of them ran back and forth for almost 20 minutes. Sometimes they disappeared into the trees, then came bounding back out, kicking up dirt and leaves. The wolf never looked toward the tents, never showed aggression. It acted like it was just happy to have found another canine to mess around with. Eventually, the wolf stopped. It stood there for a while, watching the husky, who was still wagging his tail and bouncing around. Then the wolf turned and trotted off into the woods, disappearing just as quietly as it had come. Dave said he didn't sleep the rest of the night. Not because of fear, exactly, though some of it was, but because he was so confused, so stunned by what he'd just seen. He checked the whole campsite, looked for signs of more wolves, packed the food tighter, moved it all into a bear bag, and hung it up from a tree, just to be safe. The only things missing were a few pieces of jerky and the dog food he'd left in a plastic container outside the tent. It had been knocked over and chewed open. That was the only real damage. Well, that and the tear in the tent. He showed it to us later. It looked like a clean slice, as if the wolf had used its teeth and paws to dig in just enough to stick its head through. Nothing else had been disturbed. Nothing else had even been touched. It's funny, he said it was one of the most incredible things he'd ever experienced. He wasn't angry. He didn't blame the wolf. But he also told us, clear as day, that he'd never keep food in his tent again. Not ever. It had been laziness, he admitted. He thought because he had a dog with him, nothing would get too close. He figured the dog would bark, scare things off. But the truth is, his dog had probably drawn the wolf in. And if that wolf hadn't been in a playful mood, things could have gone very differently. We stayed another 2 nights, and so did Dave. Nothing else strange happened, but that story stuck with me. Not because it was terrifying, but because it was so unexpected. Out there in the wild, anything can happen. And sometimes, even the scariest moments don't end the way you think they will. Sometimes it's not a fight. It's just a strange, quiet meeting between 2 animals that could have been enemies but weren't. Still, every time I pack for a trip now, I think about that night. About how close danger can come without a sound. I double-check my food storage. I zip my tent all the way. And I always remember, just because something can happen doesn't mean it will, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be ready. In 2004, my girlfriend and I decided to get away for the weekend and rented a small, cheap cabin on a lake. We wanted something quiet, secluded, just us and nature. The place we found was about a 2-hour drive from the city, way out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by pine trees and sitting just a few steps from the water. It wasn't anything fancy, definitely not luxurious, but it had the basic stuff: a kitchen, a bathroom, a little living room, a couple of worn-out beds, and the main selling point for her, a fireplace. She was obsessed with it. She had this thing about fireplaces because apparently her childhood home had one, and when her parents divorced and sold the place, she never got over it. So she was unusually excited to sit in front of this tiny old fireplace, like it was some big life milestone. When we got there that Friday afternoon, I brought in the bags while she walked through the cabin, giggling and clapping like a little kid. She kept talking about how she wanted to make s'mores and maybe even fall asleep in front of the fire like in a movie. I was just happy to be away from everything. It was about 4 p.m. when we were settled in. She started begging me to start a fire right then and there, but I told her we should wait until later when it gets dark. I suggested we go fishing first, just enjoy the lake while we had daylight. She wasn't thrilled, but agreed after I promised to make s'mores that night and build the fire exactly how she wanted it. But she made me at least get the firewood ready. So I dragged one of the bundles inside and unwrapped it right there on the living room floor. While I was pulling the logs apart and stacking them next to the hearth, something shot out from inside the bundle. At first, I thought it was a worm or maybe a mouse, but then I saw the long, thin, squirming body of a snake. A milk snake, although I didn't know that at the time. It had red and black and white rings on it, which looked pretty damn dangerous to me. I dropped the log I was holding and jumped back like someone had pulled a gun. My girlfriend screamed louder than I've ever heard anyone scream in my life. The snake didn't make any noise, but it slithered quickly across the floor, disappeared behind a dusty chair in the corner, and was just gone. We ran out of that cabin so fast it was like we were being chased. We stopped when we got to the dock, catching our breath, both of us freaked out beyond reason. I had no idea if that snake was poisonous, and we were far away from anything resembling a hospital. I pulled out my phone and left this panic message on the voicemail of the rental office, telling them there was a deadly snake in the cabin and that we needed someone to come get it out. I didn't get an answer, just the machine, but I hoped someone would hear it soon. My girlfriend refused to go back inside, and honestly, I didn't want to either. To calm her down, I suggested we take the boat out onto the lake for a while. The sky was starting to turn golden from the setting sun, and the water was calm, smooth as glass. We floated out there for about an hour, letting the wind and silence settle our nerves. After a while, she started to relax. I even got her to laugh a little. The fresh air helped both of us. When we came back, I noticed something strange. The screen door to the cabin was now shut. I had left it open when we ran out. I was sure of it. I figured maybe one of the maintenance guys had come by while we were out and taken care of the snake. I didn't see any cars or trucks nearby, but I convinced myself that the problem had been handled. We went inside cautiously. I poked around the living room first, checked under the chair and around the fireplace, but I didn't see anything. No sign of the snake. I decided to go ahead and build the fire to keep my promise. She sat down in front of it on the old braided rug and watched the flames start to grow. Eventually, she leaned her head on my shoulder, and we just sat there, the warm flicker of the fire lighting up the wood-paneled walls. For a moment, everything felt all right again. We roasted marshmallows, made s'mores, and even talked about maybe coming back in the winter when the lake froze over. It was one of those rare, peaceful nights. But that peace didn't last. Sometime around 8 or 9 p.m., we both heard a sound. It came from the hallway that led to the bathroom and back bedrooms. At first it was faint, like dragging feet or something heavy shuffling. Then it got clearer. It sounded like claws tapping on the wood floor, quick and deliberate, almost like those clicking noises the raptors made in Jurassic Park. I sat up immediately. My heart jumped into my throat. She looked at me with wide eyes. The first thought that shot into my head was that the snake had somehow grown legs. Or maybe it had never been a snake to begin with. Maybe it was something worse. I grabbed a blanket and the fire poker. The poker was this heavy iron rod with a twisted handle and a sharp hook at the end, almost like the Saints football team's logo. My idea was to throw the blanket over whatever it was and beat it into the floor until it stopped moving. I moved slowly down the hallway, gripping the poker tight in one hand and the blanket in the other. The hallway was mostly dark, with just a bit of light flickering from the fireplace behind me. As I stepped closer to the bathroom, I saw a large shape crouched in the shadows near the doorway. It was too big to be a snake. It looked feathery, hunched, and round. Before I could make sense of what I was seeing, the thing launched forward. It came at me with speed and fury. I fell backwards and scrambled into the living room. My girlfriend screamed behind me. The thing didn't stop. It charged in after me, flapping and shrieking. In the firelight, I finally saw what it was. A turkey. A full-grown, massive, puffed-up wild turkey. It was hissing, its wings flared out, its chest puffed, and its eyes like black beads, angry and focused. It must have gotten into the cabin while we were out on the boat, maybe chasing after the snake. It was now completely nuts, charging around the room, knocking over chairs, and smashing into walls like it wanted to fight everyone in the house. I swung the poker at it, catching it once in the side. It screamed and flapped harder. It came at me again, pecking and clawing. I hit it again, this time harder, square in the body. It stumbled but kept coming. Finally, I swung the poker like a bat and caught it across the head with a hooked end. There was a loud crack. The turkey dropped like a sack of wet cement, twitched once, then lay still. We stood there in silence, staring at it. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. I wrapped the turkey in the same blanket and carried it outside. I put it in the bed of my truck and drove straight to the rental office, which was still open but had only one guy behind the counter, a long-haired dude who looked like he spent most of his days half-stoned. I told him what happened, thanked him for removing the snake, and handed him the turkey. He looked confused but didn't say much. The next day, I got a call from him. He told me he'd finally listened to my message from the day before. No one had gone out to the cabin. No one had removed the snake. But while cleaning the turkey, he said his brother was planning to cook it. They found the snake in its stomach, swallowed whole. That turkey had come into the cabin chasing the snake and probably caught it while we were out on the lake. That's why it had been in the bathroom. And that's why it went completely insane. It was probably still half crazed from the fight. I didn't know turkeys ate snakes. I didn't even know they could kill them. So, yeah, turns out the turkey saved us from the snake.
We just didn't know it at the time.
We packed up that morning and didn't stay the second night. On the drive back, my girlfriend said she still loved the fireplace, but maybe next time we should try a hotel with central heating. I didn't argue. And now, every time I see a turkey, on TV, in the store, wherever, I think about that night, that fire, and that damn demon bird charging out of the dark like it wanted my soul. And now you know, turkeys eat snakes. This happened about 7 years ago when I was 16 during my final summer as a camper at an overnight camp in New England. I'd been going there since I was a little kid, and by that point I knew every trail, every cabin, every stupid ghost story the younger campers still got spooked by. That summer was special though. It was the last time I'd be there as a camper. I was a senior, as we called ourselves, and we all tried to go out with a bang, pull the best pranks, tell the scariest stories, make the most of our last weeks before real life started creeping in. One of the traditions at the camp was something we called the overnight. Every cabin got assigned one-night procession to go on a long hike to a remote site and camp out under the stars. No tents, just sleeping bags, food cooked over a fire, and the woods all around. My cabin and one other were paired together for the overnight that year, and the spot we were assigned to was about 2.5 miles away from the main camp, at the top of this massive hill that we always just called the Rock. It was a real climb to get up there, and once you reached the top, it opened up into this strange patch of flat, gray stone. Just bare rock, a few scraggly shrubs poking through cracks, surrounded on all sides by dense forest. It was completely quiet up there, almost too quiet sometimes, especially at night. We joked that it was the perfect place for a horror movie. That summer, the joke turned into something we took way too seriously. A few days before our overnight, one of the counselors told a story, probably trying to scare us for fun, about how there were townies who lived past the far side of the hill. Townies were just the people who lived in the nearby town, but we treated them like they were some strange tribe that hated us. The camp owned all the land around the lake and for miles beyond it, so we rarely saw anyone who wasn't part of camp. But the idea of townies creeping through the woods stuck in our heads. We started whispering about it late at night, making up stories about them watching us from the trees or planning to sneak in and mess with us. By the time the night of the overnight came, we were fully obsessed with the idea. We hiked up the hill in the late afternoon, sweating through our shirts, carrying way too much gear for a single night. The counselors let us set up near the edge of the trees where the ground was soft enough for sleeping bags and the fire pit was already made. We built a fire, cooked burgers and hot dogs, and by nightfall, the whole group, maybe 16 kids between the two cabins, plus 4 counselors, was sitting around telling scary stories and trying to outcreep each other. It was a clear night, chilly but not uncomfortable, with the kind of stars you only see when you're far away from any city. Once it got late, most of the kids curled up in their bags. A few of us stayed up whispering, poking the fire, daring each other to walk to the edge of the rock and stare into the woods. That's when someone said they heard voices. It was quiet at first, just a couple of kids saying they thought they heard something moving out in the woods. Then more kids started hearing it too. Something like low talking, footsteps on leaves, maybe even a laugh. The fire flickered and popped, but when you really stopped and listened, it was like there was something out there. Not animals. Something bigger. People. A few of the younger kids started to get scared. They whispered to the counselors, asking if we should move, maybe go back to camp early. The counselors told us it was our imaginations, that it was the wind or animals or just kids messing around. Still, 2 of the counselors said they'd check it out just to be sure. We were told to stay close to the fire, stay quiet, and wait. The 2 who went in were Joe and Thomas. Joe was a beast of a man, tall, maybe 6 feet 3 inches or more, all muscle. The kind of guy you'd expect to play linebacker or dunk a basketball without trying. Thomas was shorter, regular build, quiet, and a little more serious. They each grabbed flashlights and walked into the woods, their beams bouncing between the trees, slowly fading as they got farther away. At first, it was silent again. No voices, no movement. Just the crackle of the fire and the sound of a few nervous kids breathing too hard. Then we heard it. It was Joe's voice, loud and sharp, echoing off the trees. "You guys can't be here. This is private property. We have a walkie-talkie, and we will call the police if you do not leave." Every kid froze. Our stomachs dropped at the exact same time. That wasn't the kind of voice you used to mess around. It was angry, serious, and we all knew Joe was too big to be scared unless there was something real. Then came the bang. A deep, awful crack that sounded like wood hitting flesh or maybe metal. Then a scream, so sharp and raw it didn't even sound human. It was the kind of scream that makes you want to run even if you don't know what you're running from. Seconds later, Joe burst out of the trees. His face was pale and wild, his arms smeared with dirt. He didn't look injured, but something in his eyes was wrong. He shouted to the other counselors, "Get the kids out of here now," and turned back without explaining a thing. He just ran straight back into the woods. Another counselor grabbed 2 of the big kitchen steak knives we'd brought for cooking and sprinted in after him, without saying a word. That left 2 adults with a dozen terrified kids, most of us in our underwear or sleeping gear, with no idea what was happening. We didn't wait for answers. The counselors started yelling for us to grab what we could and run. Some of us didn't even put shoes on. We sprinted back down the trail, slipping on rocks, scraping our hands and legs on branches, crashing through underbrush in the pitch dark. Some kids were crying. Others were trying to be tough, holding sticks like weapons. One kid kept whispering a prayer under his breath the whole way down. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. The trail was steep and narrow, and a few of us fell more than once. The counselors were behind us, yelling for us to keep moving. Every sound from the woods made us jump, snapping twigs, owls, even the wind in the trees. I honestly thought we were going to die, that someone was going to jump out of the woods and grab us. I kept imagining townies with knives or bats, waiting just off the trail. About halfway down the hill, just as my legs were about to give out, we saw lights behind us. Joe, Thomas, and the other counselor were catching up. They were breathing hard but unhurt. Joe had a big smile on his face. Thomas looked nervous. The third counselor looked furious. We didn't get any answers until we got all the way back to camp. We were brought into the dining hall, given water and blankets, and told to stay calm. Then they explained everything. Joe and Thomas had planned the whole thing. It was a prank. They thought it would be funny to scare us by pretending there were people in the woods. Joe's shouting, the bang, the scream. It was all fake. They had never seen anyone. The third counselor hadn't been told, so when he heard what he thought was an attack, he panicked like the rest of us. That's why he ran in with the knives. That's why we ran like our lives depended on it. The camp director was called. Parents were notified. Joe and Thomas got in serious trouble. I think they were fired that night, or maybe the next morning. The story spread fast. Everyone at camp knew about it by the next day. Most kids were still shaken. Some were pissed off. A few thought it was funny after they'd calmed down, but not many. After that, the camp made a new rule. Counselors were no longer allowed to play scary pranks or tell intense stories during overnights. They said it was for safety, which I guess made sense, but honestly, it was more about trust. After something like that, you don't really believe what the counselors tell you anymore. Even now, years later, I remember that night more clearly than any other moment from camp. The way the screams sounded, the way my heart felt like it was going to explode, the sheer terror of running barefoot down that hill in the dark. And the worst part? For a few seconds, I honestly thought someone had died. That someone had come into the woods and attacked us. I think some part of me still doesn't fully believe it was just a prank. I still wonder sometimes if they really were just messing around, or if maybe they saw something out there that they never admitted. It was a warm weekend in late spring when I decided to head out to a biker rally a few hours from home. One of those multi-day events out in the countryside. Cheap beer, loud music, bikes lined up everywhere, and people from all over. The kind of place where you don't need to know anyone, but you'll still find yourself passing around bottles and stories by a fire before the night's over. I drove my car out there. Didn't feel like riding this time, just wanted the convenience of tossing all my gear in the back and not worrying about weather. I brought a decent-sized tent, camp chair, some food, and more than enough beer. Set up camp right next to the car, no more than 15 feet from it. The sun was still up when I finished, and already the place was alive. Music blasting, engines rumbling, laughter echoing over the sound of revving pipes. People were scattered all around the open field, tents popping up at different angles, bikes and cars parked in clusters, fires starting here and there. By nightfall, the party was in full swing. I walked around for a while, ended up talking with a couple guys from Georgia and a group from Indiana. Sat by their fire a while, shared some food and a few beers, then wandered back to my camp. The stars were out, air cool but not cold. The kind of weather that makes you appreciate the night even more. I sat in my chair a while, watching people still moving around in the distance, then climbed into my tent around 1:30 or so. My tent had mesh windows on the sides and front. I left the rain fly off for airflow, since it wasn't supposed to rain. I zipped the windows closed, but kept the flap open a bit for a breeze. My car was parked just outside, close enough to feel like a little safety barrier, even though I wasn't worried about much. I'm not a small guy, and these rallies, while rowdy, are usually full of good people. Everyone's there for the same reason: ride, drink, have fun, maybe forget about regular life for a bit. I must have been asleep for an hour or so when something woke me. Not a loud sound, but sharp enough to snap me out of a deep sleep. I blinked, looked around, and heard it again. Someone was trying to open my car door. Not gently either. It was loud, fast, and aggressive, like someone yanking on the handle over and over. I sat up fast, heart kicking into gear. My head cleared quick. I wasn't drunk. Hadn't even had that much to drink earlier. I reached for my pants, but before I even got them on, I leaned toward the window of the tent and unzipped the mesh. I could see the shape of someone standing by my car. Not moving, just standing there, one hand still on the door handle. I snapped, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "Hey, get the fuck away from my car." He didn't move, just stood there and looked straight at me through the tent. Eyes locked on mine, not blinking. I couldn't make out his face clearly in the dark, but his posture. It was weird. He wasn't scared, surprised, or apologetic. Just swaying a little, like he was waiting for something. It was like he wanted me to come out. My heart was pounding, and every part of me was screaming to go handle it. I threw on my pants and boots, unzipped the tent, and stepped out into the cool night air. He was still there, just swaying slightly, hands hanging by his sides now, staring. I walked right up to him, keeping my distance by a few feet. I didn't yell again, didn't want to wake up half the camp, but I was ready. If he lunged, I was ready to fight. "What the fuck are you doing?" There was a pause, then a slow, slurred reply. "Trying to get in my car. Wanna sleep." His words were mushy, dragged out, like his mouth wasn't sure how to form them. That's when I really looked at him. Mid-30s maybe, skinny, long messy hair, wearing a leather vest over a shirt that looked like it had been slept in. His eyes weren't angry. They were just empty.
Glazed.
He was pissed drunk. Lost, confused, probably didn't even know where he was anymore. I took a breath and tried to bring myself back down. I could feel the heat in my chest, that leftover tension from thinking something worse was about to go down. It didn't take much to imagine how bad it could have gotten if I hadn't waited a second to listen. I could have come flying out of the tent and knocked him out before he said a word. And from the looks of him, that might have seriously hurt the guy. "Your car's not here, man," I said. "Come on, let's go find it." He didn't say anything, just nodded slowly and followed me like a kid who'd gotten caught doing something wrong. We walked around for a few minutes, him stumbling behind me. I asked his name. He didn't answer. I started calling out, "Anyone know this guy?" Eventually, a guy at another campfire shouted, "Randy? That you?" I waved him over and explained what happened. Turned out the guy's name really was Randy. He'd passed out in a camp chair, woke up confused, wandered off in the dark looking for his car, and ended up at mine. His actual car was 2 rows over, barely visible behind a cluster of bikes and tents. They helped him into the passenger seat and tossed a blanket over him. I went back to my tent, sat in the chair outside for a while, trying to let the adrenaline work its way out. The stars were still out, but the party had quieted down. I looked over at my car a few times. The image of him standing there blankly staring at me stuck with me longer than I expected. Not because he was dangerous, but because for a minute I really didn't know what was going to happen. I got a couple more hours of sleep and woke up to the smell of bacon and burnt coffee. Classic rally morning. People were up, fires rekindled. Someone was already revving an engine just to be annoying. I sat by the fire with some guys I'd met the night before, eating sausage out of a cast iron pan and trying to shake off the weirdness. Then I saw him. Randy. Sober now, eyes a little bloodshot, walking slow like he wasn't sure if he was welcome anywhere. He stopped a few feet away and looked at me. "You the dude that helped me find my car last night?" I stood up.
Yeah.
He looked at me for a second, like he wasn't sure what to say next. Then he nodded, looked me up and down, probably realizing how close he came to getting knocked out cold, and said, "Dude, thanks for not fucking me up last night." He handed me a 12-pack of beer. Decent stuff, too. He stuck around for a while after that, sat with us for a bit, shared a few laughs. The kind of guy you'd never expect to cause trouble when he's sober. It stuck with me, though, that whole thing. It could have gone a whole lot different. All it takes is one bad assumption, one fast move. And out there, where there's no cell signal, no security, just a bunch of half-drunk strangers around a fire, there's not a lot between a funny story and a tragedy. I was glad I waited. Glad I asked. Glad it ended the way it did. We stayed another night. Nothing weird happened after that. Just more beer, more stories, more writing. But I never forgot that moment. The way he stood there, not saying a word, not moving, swaying in the dark. And I never sleep at a rally now without locking my car. This happened about 7 years ago, back when I was in my final summer as a camper at my overnight camp in New England. I'd been going to this camp for years, and by then I knew every trail, every cabin, every tradition. That year felt like a big deal. Me and the other returning last year campers all wanted to make the most of it. You kind of feel invincible at that age, 16, 17, old enough to think you know everything, still young enough to be completely stupid. Part of our camp's routine was the overnight. Basically, each cabin got sent off to a separate site somewhere on camp property for a night under the stars. It was supposed to be one of those experiences where you learn how to build a fire, cook your own dinner, tell some scary stories, bond, and then hike back in the morning. That year, our overnight was set up as a joint trip with another cabin, all guys our age. The site was about 2.5 miles away at the top of a massive hill. We used to call it Bald Top because the summit was just flat rock, open to the sky, surrounded by dense forest on all sides. From up there, you could see treetops stretching all the way to the other side of the lake. It was beautiful, yeah, but also a little eerie, especially as it got dark. There was nothing up there. No cell signal, no buildings, no lights, just us, our tents, a fire pit, and woods in every direction. That summer, our whole age group had been fixated on this idea of townies. These were the people who lived in the small towns that bordered the camp's property. The camp actually owned a huge chunk of land around the lake, so we never really saw anyone from outside. But it was kind of this creepy half-joke that we had. What if some weird townies came sneaking into camp one night? What if they watched us from the woods? Broke into a cabin? We knew it was dumb, but that didn't stop us from talking about it. Some of the younger counselors played along with it too, especially after dark, which probably didn't help. The hike up to Bald Top wasn't bad, just long. We carried our sleeping bags, tents, food, and whatever else we needed in big packs and got there around late afternoon. We set up just before sunset. The counselors helped us start a fire, and we cooked some hot dogs and foil packs with potatoes and onions and stuff. Everyone was in a good mood. We told a few stories, talked about how this was our last overnight as campers, and watched the stars come out. The whole hilltop got really quiet after dark. You could hear the crackle of the fire, the buzzing of insects, and not much else. Sometime after we'd started to get into our tents, a few guys said they were hearing things. Not just animal noises, but actual footsteps or voices in the trees. I didn't hear anything myself, but once one or two people say they heard something, suddenly everyone's on edge. A couple kids came out of their tents saying they thought someone was out there. Some said they saw shadows moving behind the tree line. It wasn't panic exactly, but there was a definite sense of something not being right. The counselors tried to calm us down. They said it was just animals or the wind. They told us the usual stuff. This is private property. No one ever comes out here. We're totally safe. But it didn't work. Too many kids were scared. So two of the counselors, Joe and Thomas, volunteered to go check it out. Joe was this big guy, tall, really athletic, looked like he could probably bench press a small tree. Thomas was more average looking, but he was calm and responsible. Everyone liked him. They told us they were going to walk a short perimeter through the trees just to be sure there was nothing going on. They took one of the walkie-talkies and disappeared into the woods. The rest of us sat around the dying fire, trying to act like we weren't all staring at the trees, listening for something. It was quiet for a while, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Then we heard it. It started with Joe's voice, loud and angry, cutting through the trees. He wasn't yelling exactly, but he was speaking forcefully, like he was confronting someone. He was saying things like, "You can't be here. This is private property. We have a walkie. If you don't leave, we're calling the police." The second I heard that, my stomach dropped. It didn't sound like a joke. And this wasn't a story anymore. Everyone froze. Then came this loud bang, like something heavy hitting something else. Right after that, there was this scream. High-pitched, sharp, like someone had been seriously hurt. It didn't sound fake. It sounded like panic. Then Joe came sprinting out of the trees, face pale and wild-eyed. He pointed back toward the woods and yelled something like, "Get the kids out of here now," and turned back around, vanishing into the trees again. Total chaos broke out. One of the other counselors grabbed a couple of steak knives we'd used for cooking and ran in after him. The rest of us? We just ran. Most of us weren't even dressed properly. Some kids were barefoot. A lot of us were just in boxers or shorts. We were tearing down that rocky hill in the dark, half blind, tripping over roots, scraping legs on branches. Kids were crying. I remember one guy behind me kept muttering prayers under his breath. A few tried to grab sticks or rocks, like they were going to fight off someone in the woods. I was just focused on not falling and trying to stay with the group. I remember how sharp the air felt on my chest, how the cold sweat stuck to my back. I remember the way my heart was beating so fast I thought I might actually throw up. My legs were shaking as I ran, but I didn't stop. None of us did. It was pure adrenaline. We were maybe halfway down the hill, stumbling through the trees and trying to stick together when we saw flashlights bobbing toward us. It was Joe, Thomas, and the counselor who had run in after them. They were laughing. Not just laughing, they were bent over, hands on knees, out of breath from how hard they were laughing. That's when it hit us. They'd made the whole thing up. Turns out Joe and Thomas had decided to play into the whole towny thing as a prank. They didn't tell the third counselor. That bang and scream? Joe had kicked a log or something and screamed as loud as he could. Then he ran back, told us to flee, and turned around to rescue Thomas. The plan was just to scare us a bit, not cause full-blown hysteria. But since they didn't tell the other counselor, he believed it. And because we trusted him, we believed it. It spiraled way out of control. No one said much right then. Some kids were furious. Others were just too exhausted and shaken up to even react. We all sat down right there on the trail and tried to catch our breath. My legs were covered in scratches, and one guy had twisted his ankle pretty bad. It took us a while to hike back up and collect our stuff in the dark. We didn't even finish the overnight. The counselors ended up walking us all the way back to the main camp in the middle of the night. The next morning, the camp director was waiting for us. Joe and Thomas got reamed out. Word spread fast, and pretty soon every kid at camp was talking about what happened. After that, the camp made a new rule. Counselors were no longer allowed to scare campers. No pranks. No fake stories. Nothing. They said it was for safety reasons, but everyone knew it was because of us. Looking back on it now, I can laugh. A little. But in that moment, that night, it was the most terrified I've ever been in my life. No movie or ghost story ever came close. And even though we were never really in danger, that fear was real. The panic was real. That night is still burned into my brain, every second of it. And I think if you asked any of the other guys who were there, they'd say the same.